Have you ever correctly had a gut feeling to dislike someone who, on the surface, was a cool person that everybody else liked? What's that story? Story 1. My mom was a single mom and did the best she could. However, she thought it might be better to leave me with a neighbor than at home alone. From the age of 6, I pleaded with my mom to let me stay home alone until she got home from work, and that I would be okay. My intuition was right. The neighbor was convicted of multiple murders of single moms 1 and 2 towns over when DNA evidence came into being. He only liked to date and kill non-obese women. Fortunately, my mother was fat. Story 2. Apparently, when I was 4 or 5, my grandma introduced me to a new boyfriend. Everybody liked him, but I would have nothing to do with him. I guess he just came into her apartment one day and walked at her with something behind his back, saying nothing. She got an eerie feeling and said, "Are you going to kill me?" With a dead-faced stare, he came at her. She managed to jump over some furniture and get away. She's always been in great shape, running 3 miles a day until age 80. She got somewhere safe, called the police, and never saw him again. Story 3. Used to work with a psychopath. Dude who only ate cookie cake, only watched Disney movies, only listened to music from the 30s and 40s, drove an antique muscle car, enjoyed killing small animals, and always carried a 6-inch buck knife, which I wouldn't consider weird except we worked in hospitality. If there was ever a stereotype for serial killers, this guy freaking nailed it. Everybody else had passed him off as a sweet, sheltered young guy who didn't realize he was kind of strange. I did too until we started talking one night and he admitted to me he had some serious anger issues, blackouts and the like. Get into our group of friends at work and starts kind of obsessing over one of our female coworkers. Everybody passes it off as a crush. I knew better and it wasn't pretty, but he played the let's be friends card. So me and my buddy were super tight with this chick. She started telling us he was saying things behind our backs trying to make it look like we were talking about her, obviously trying to separate us. I'm not fooled. Couple of months go by, things calm a bit. We're still being nice to the guy. Invite him to go hiking with my buddy, my little brother, and I. The dude shows up on the trail with a freaking combat machete, his buck knife, a slingshot if I remember correctly, and looking like we're about to play the most dangerous game ever. Both my bros pass it off as enthusiasm for the hike. I'm wary. I pick up a strong walking stick and begin carving it into a spear as we walk. Psycho notices and looks upset, like I've inconvenienced him, and then asks if we all want to come to a secret spot. It's only 12 miles into the trail and off the path by a little bit. My little brother was fat, and we only had 1 bottle of water between us all in a southern summer. I tell him we can't. Then he starts insisting my buddy go with him, and he was almost about to until I dropped our code phrase and gestured to bail. Always have one of those or a few of these with your friends. He says he's coming with me, and that's when I saw the psycho look in his eyes. Rage. He drew his machete and stepped towards my friend as he turned his back. So I stepped towards him with my spear. He saw me and shot off this smile and a laugh and said he'd go alone, then stepped off the trail into the woods and disappeared. I know he was watching us as we left because I told my buddy to take my little brother and stay at least 10 yards in front of me, and the entire time I could hear twigs snapping behind us. To wrap it up, we all survived, but it wasn't long after that when Psycho started stalking our coworker, showing up at random times and discarding dead animals on her property. She complained along with a dozen people not long after that, and he was fired, but not before he attacked her at work and had his ass beat. Don't know what happened to him after that. Don't really want to. Story 4. The new guy at the office. He was very charming and everyone liked him from day one, but there was something off. 3 months later, he throws me under the bus on a big project, and it backfires on him because I was ready. He ended up quitting a couple of months after because people knew what he'd done and they stopped working with him. Don't be an ass. There was a meeting coming up and he invites me along as a fly on the wall. Since I didn't trust him, I prepared content for the meeting just in case. When the meeting started, he was not on the conference call and the stakeholder says, "Hey, your coworker said you had numbers to present." Well, thank God I had numbers and a slide ready. The meeting ended and he never showed up, and the stakeholder was pissed at him. He wrote a long, nasty email to our manager. My manager asked me what happened, and I told him playing dumb that he had invited me to the meeting with no direction. But good thing I had slides ready, because otherwise our team and my boss would have looked bad. He agreed and ended up chewing him out pretty badly, and I got a big recognition for always being ready. I warned my close coworkers about what he'd done to me, and little by little, everyone noticed how crappy he was and started giving him the cold shoulder. He eventually quit, and no one in the office cared by that point. Story 5. Strongly urged by my parents to hang out with a girl on my bus. She ends up having an affair with her foster father and stabbed her foster mother to death because the dad convinced her to. Their 14-year-old biological daughter witnessed the whole thing. Some girl started talking to me on the bus ride home. I thought there was something off about her, but my parents, who are inherently optimists, told me to be nice and hang out with her. They even invited her over for dinner a few times. She lived about a 4-minute walk away from me, so it was hard to come up with excuses not to hang out. We eventually hung out a few times, and I found out that she was a foster kid and had gotten bounced around a lot. She was also on a lot of medication for bad joints, bipolar disease, and a few other things. She was almost 18. Well, anyway, it turns out she was having an affair with the father, and they plotted together to kill the mom so they could be together. They made sure to plan it during a time when the dad was out of town. The girl ends up stabbing her foster mother to death, and the family's biological daughter is the one to call 911. They put the 911 tape up online, and it was the worst thing I've ever had to listen to. Story 6. When I was in senior high school, my multimedia teacher was loved by everybody, but I hated that guy. He was a complete freak to me. He was super chill with the guys and an incorrigible flirt with the girls. We're 98% under 18. But everybody laughed when I'd say something about how weird he was around the chicks, and was even told it was because I was overweight, unattractive, and too sarcastic or mouthy. And that's why he picked on me. Oh well, life went on. A few years after high school, I heard he was fired for having sex with an underage student. His poor wife at the time worked in the attendance office too, and had to take time away from work so the gossip would simmer down. I knew that guy was a creep. Story 7. One of my brothers was dating this girl, and everyone else had met her several times before I did, since I was off at college. So the first impression I get of her is when she shows up at our house and just walks right in. Doesn't knock, doesn't let anyone know she's there. Just walks her happy ass inside and sits on the couch. So then when I came down the hallway into the living room, the witch had this super vapid smile on her face. I just had this weird gut instinct that she was hiding something from everyone and was going to fight to the death to keep it hidden. I expressed to my mom that she gave me a weird vibe, and I got told to stop being jealous. But a long story shorter, she ended up having an entirely other relationship and life with another guy 3 hours away. Story 8. My sister's boyfriend. I just immediately found him to be very fake and disingenuous, but the rest of my family loved him and found him very charming. He owned a running store franchise that was more successful than the original store and was also doing well trading on the stock market. He sold the store back to the owners for a ton of money to focus on the stock market, but this was around the time of the stock market crash. So to help with that, he worked at the store as a salesman. They eventually got married and bought a house. And that's when the cops come knocking at the door to their large home with a view. He wasn't rich. He never owned the store. He was only ever a worker and had been stealing cash from the register products and selling them on eBay. The divorce came quickly enough after that. Story 9. Labrador could smell the evil on a wife beater. Kind of related, not a person but a dog. Years ago, I had a girlfriend who lived at home with her sister, parents, 3 dogs, and a cat. One of the dogs was a big, goofy lab that loved everyone. I mean everyone. 2-year-olds could climb all over him, and he loved it. Anyway, the sister had been seeing some guy for a little while, and she was bringing him home to meet the family for the first time. The guy hadn't even come to the door yet. The dog was in the house and went ballistic. I'd never seen anything like it. He went from goofball to apex predator. Needless to say, he couldn't come into the house. They had to leave. About 2 weeks later, the sister comes home, he slapped her, and she ended it. She also found out that he beats his ex-wife before her. Story 10. My stepdad, on the surface, seemed like a good guy. Went to church on Sundays and once on Wednesdays. Always helped out when someone needed help, whether it was something as simple as loaning $5 to something as complicated as roofing a house. Had a good paying job. Refused to smoke inside the house. When he and my mom went out on dates, he always made sure to bring home food for all of us and toys for the younger kids. Would randomly take everyone out to dinner or to the theater. Despite all of that, I disliked him from the moment I met him. even before he showed interest in my mom. People told me I was being paranoid and not to worry about it. Fast forward a year, he and my mom are married. I just got a job and was waiting on my first paycheck to move out on my own. My manager gets a frantic call that I need to come home pronto. My stepdad had been secretly spending all of our bill money on pot. We were about to be evicted. The power had already been disconnected, the water service was about to be, and stepdad tried to kill my pregnant mom. Later on, during the restrainer order court meeting, he threatened to cut the baby out of my mom's stomach and leave her and the fetus in an abandoned fridge in the field. He was buying an inordinate amount of pot and sharing it among 10 to 15 people daily. Not just enough to get high then, but enough to supply those guys and their wives or girlfriends. And yes, it was pot, not heroin. Story 11. I'm a chef, and within 1 minute of hiring someone, I know if they are going to work or will need to be replaced. First impressions mean a lot, so if you bring up killing your wife, which happened last week, or pain pills yesterday, within the first 5 minutes of your first shift, it's not going to work out because you're an idiot. Story 12. My partner moved in with a girl who was her best friend. I had gut feelings about her being not exactly stable, due to my own history of not being exactly a great teenager and also dating a few not-so-stable girls. I'm talking turning up at your house at 2 a.m. because I didn't reply to a text. My girlfriend loved this girl and had a great friendship apparently, so I let it go along. But then she went weird and started not showing up at the apartment for a couple of weeks. When she did turn up, she always did something impulsive that ended in failure. For example, bought a $50 washing machine that leaked everywhere. Oh, and told the other roommate that she'd hit the other roommate's cat with her car because she suddenly developed an allergy to them. Safe to say, my girlfriend finally realized that this other girl was unstable, manipulative, and frankly just didn't care about anyone but herself. She ended up breaking the lease, earning a mark on herself, and getting kicked out. Story 13. My older brother's best friend in high school was considered to be a cool guy, well-liked and fun to have around, except that I suspected him to be devious and something of a perv. He had this obsession for our mom that was obvious to me, but no one else picked up on it. One day after school, I caught him going through mom's drawers, checking out her personal clothes and underwear, and doing stuff I just won't mention here. After he got his motorcycle at age 17, he asked her if she'd like to take a ride. That's when I told my brother the truth about his so-called best friend, and asked him to put a stop to it or I'd tell Dad. Story 14. I feel like maybe I was that person a couple of times. Before years of therapy, I was a liar. This went on pretty much for my whole life. I've always been a really nice guy. I was just confused for a few decades. At the time, there had to be a few people who saw through me. I can remember one guy in particular who was in a group of friends I had at the time, who grew cold to me after a while. The worst part is that this behavior caused me to run away from everything in my life after a few years. At some point, my lying would start falling apart and I'd need to get new friends. I'm so glad that aspect of my life is over. To all other liars out there, you're not fooling anyone except for yourself. Get some help, please. Story 15. A few years ago, when I was still in college, I took a summer job at a movie theater. I met a lot of really cool people there, including my significant other. But there was this one guy who always gave me the creeps. We'll call him Drew. He was friends with almost everyone, including my SO, and had been for years. We'd attend the same parties and he'd do all these little things that would feel like red flags to me, but apparently not to anyone else. Fast forward about a year, I no longer work there. My SO and I have been together for maybe a year, and he has been promoted to manager. Drew has also been promoted to supervisor. It should be noted that there were a lot of teenagers employed at this theater. One day, 2 of the younger girls came into the office. If they were 18, they were only just. To talk to my SO. They tell him they're sorry because they know my SO is friends with Drew, but they have to tell him something. The younger one tells him that a few weeks prior, she was sitting alone in the break room, eating her lunch. Drew walks in and says to her, "Do you touch yourself?" She doesn't answer. He says, "Because if not, you should." I think he said more, but my SO was so furious when he told me that story that he was having trouble telling it. My SO fills out the report for the poor girl and passes it on to the GM, who then informs him that Drew had 5 counts of sexual harassment on his file already, but corporate loved him, so they could never fire him. My SO never spoke to Drew again. Last I heard, he was fired and removed from his job at a brewery by security for sexual harassment. Many of our other friends are still very close to him. I don't understand it, but I'm just thrilled to have that creep out of my life. Story 16. When I was a boy, aged 7 to 8, at a coffee shop I would go to my parents frequently, there would often be a middle-aged Asian woman hanging out. She was a regular. The baristas knew her and my parents were friendly with her. Sometimes I would play board games with my parents and her. She gave me the freaking creeps, but I couldn't pinpoint why. My parents knew I didn't like her much, but not to the full extent. Anyway, the very first time I was with her without my parents, they were starting the car or something like that, she tried to get me to come back to her house. She wouldn't take no for an answer and got pushy. When my parents came back, I told them what happened and we never went there again. Story 17. Not me, but my sister. She has this uncanny ability to detect crazy people. My first boyfriend was secretly abused. She called it after knowing him for 2 days. My next boyfriend's mom eventually forced me to take a pregnancy test because I had been looking rather pregnant, and she wanted to know. She knew after the first visit meeting her. My toxic ex-best friend of 7 years, she knew after a year. All of the people my sister calls out for being crazy, I now believe and wholeheartedly avoid. Wow, I want to meet your sister and find out myself. Story 18. I had a manager years ago that everybody loved. When I was hired and ended up on his team, and any number of people came to me saying how lucky I was and that they were jealous, he takes care of his people, always gets good projects for them, makes sure they get a good cut of the yearly salary increase, etc., etc. The day I started was his last day before he went on a 2 to 3 week vacation, so I only met him briefly and walked away from that with plenty of anxiety. Something was just off with this guy. But again, everyone loved him. People that had known him for years. What did I know? Over the course of next year, people were just giving this guy a hand job at every turn. I didn't get it. We got along fine, but I made sure to keep my hand on my own dick. After a while, I'd start to voice my concerns a bit to some of my coworkers. I was treated as an outcast, and some of his bigger fanboys were outright hostile at times. So fast forward a few years, and to my knowledge, I was the only one of 100 people that ever voiced anything but absolute admiration for the guy. Then things started unraveling. Let's see. Turns out he was hooking up with the wives of his 2 employees. Rumor has it, also someone's daughter. But I'm not so sure about that, and I guess he left them with a lifelong gift that keeps on giving. He was for years regularly stealing from the company. I'd heard somewhere north of 1 million all up. I'm pretty sure that's probably an accurate number. He would regularly go on long-term 3+ weeks vacation. We find out it was because he had serial cases of drinking under the influence and was in jail or rehab 2 to 3 times a year. This was long before online records, so nobody ever knew. He frequently beat his wife and kids. Again, pre-online world, so nobody really had any way of knowing. One of his sons has some type of permanent vision problem because of a beating. He finally hit someone while drunk, so he had a trial. It was a family member of someone prominent in the community, so it got some press. That was how we all became aware that he was the real deal. He goes to trial and is convicted. They had a sentencing hearing and the victim and the family members said their piece. Then this guy's family, his father, a sister, and a nephew, go up to, we think, support him. Wrong. All 3 of them begged the judge to give him the max sentence. They spoke of him stealing from the family, massive drug and alcohol abuse, hinted at rape, family members, and so on. The judge gave him 3 years, and I think he was out in 6 months. The insane thing is that some of his fanboys hoped that he'd be hired back to his job when he was released. People were jockeying to position themselves back on his team if he was rehired. I noped right out of there at that point. Story 19. When I first met my birth mother's uncle, I was instantly creeped out by him. He's in his 40s, in a band, has heaps of friends everywhere he goes, and gets on well with everyone. But I just had a horrible gut feeling and didn't trust him. He's a really touchy-feely guy, and he would try to kiss us on the lips and pass it off as just being family. Turns out he touched my birth mom and had sex with her when she was just a child. My mother let us, as children, hang out with her rape. His son, my birth mom's cousin, is a convicted pedophile too, and just recently got out of prison. I'm so glad I was in long-term foster care, but I really wish I wasn't allowed contact with my birth family. They are truly the definition of screwed up. Story 20. My mother's cousin is a vet out in a rural area. This dude makes a bank and is a really nice guy. He was very close with his elderly mom and dad. Sadly, his first wife lost a ton of weight and then felt that she was out of his league and left him. A few years later, he shows up at my mom's house with a Sophia Loren type, 10 times out of his league. She was all sweet and sugar pie to everyone. I forgot what I did to piss her off, but it was an accident. She broke character just for a second and let Cruella de Vil show through. I was a kid and she grabbed my arm and looked at me like she would kill me. Everyone said I was crazy and mean, and that looks aren't everything, and that she loves him, like I was trying to sabotage his relationship. Screw me, right? Flash forward 2 years. She kicked his parents out of the house they were in for 50 years, sold their home against their will, stole all their money, forced him to choose between them and her. Sadly, he chose her. She drained him, tore apart his family, and ruined the last year of his father's life. He died scared and miserable. Told his mother, "Just give me the money. You won't live long enough to see it." It broke her heart that her son just stood there. But karma paid that witch a visit to the tune of acute leukemia, and she died. His mother is still alive and in her 90s and doing pretty well. He's back in the fold. Just sucks that his father didn't get to see the end, where everything went back to the way it was.